What if the strongest man who ever lived was reborn as a baby, and still ended up more dangerous than everyone around him? That's not a hypothetical, that's Zeke Eldrian, and this is his story. Before he was Zeke, he was Gilfus Eldrian, a name that made entire kingdoms go quiet. For decades, Gilfus had clawed his way to the top of the martial world, earning a rank nobody else in recorded history had ever touched. 10 stars. One envisions the body as a universe, and the stars move within it, each one a compressed core of true power pushed to its absolute limit. Most warriors live and die never reaching 2 stars. Gilfus had 10, and still, even at the peak, there was one thing that kept gnawing at him. He had not reached the true pinnacle of martial arts, the absolute ceiling, and that single gap haunted him through every victory. So desperate was he to close it that he chased down a legend most men dismissed as fairy tale, a golden fruit, hidden inside a sanctuary, guarded by a dragon, said to grant immortality. Gilfus fought that dragon, killed it, and sat on the corpse like a conqueror before plucking the fruit. He ate it right then and there, confident that whatever lay beyond human limits was finally within reach. Decades passed, Gilfus aged, his body slowed while his reputation stayed immovable. And then came the deathbed, his eldest son Goliam sitting beside him, grief already pooling in the boy's eyes. Gilfus told his children he had no regrets, that he lived a good life, that he was at peace. He said all the right things. He meant almost none of them. Because deep in the marrow of a dying man who had killed dragons and shattered records, there was still that one unfilled hunger. He had not reached the peak, he never reached the peak. And then his eyes opened again. Everything looked wrong. The ceiling was wrong. The scale was wrong. And when he raised his hand, he saw tiny, pudgy baby fingers staring back at him. A 10-star martial legend was lying in a baby cot, completely baffled. He did what any reasonable ancient warrior would do. He took a breath, assessed the situation, and concluded that reincarnation had just happened to him. The immortality fruit had not granted eternal life, it had granted a second life, and instead of despair, Gilfus Eldrian, now a squirming infant, smiled. Because this time, he was going to finish what he started. He noticed there were other babies around him, in what appeared to be a communal nursery. And by the emblem on the walls, he figured out something important. He had been reborn into a powerful warrior clan, the Lagan family. He had reincarnated a full millennium into the future, into a world utterly reshaped from the one he remembered. But before he could do much more than observe, the maids came in with feeding bottles. One of those maids reached into a nearby cot, pulled out a baby goblin, and fed it something from a bottle filled with a red, glowing liquid. The goblin exploded. Blood splattered across the cot, across the room, across the face of a reincarnated martial god, who was now very much reconsidering his situation. The maids diluted the liquid and kept going, pouring it into every infant in the room without a second thought. When a maid shoved the bottle into his mouth, he got one taste and immediately knew what it was. Ancient dragon's blood. They were feeding babies ancient dragon's blood. Every instinct in his 10-star body screamed to spit it out. And he watched the other babies doing exactly that, gagging, spitting, crying. But then a different thought cut through the noise. What if he didn't spit it out? What if he drank every single drop? In his past life, he had already absorbed the true source power of a divine dragon. His body had been tempered beyond what any ordinary person could survive. So instead of spitting, he drank every drop, with the focused expression of a man who had fought dragons for sport. Even the maid looked shaken, watching an infant happily gulp down something that had just made a goblin detonate. He finished the bottle, got placed back in his cot, and because he was still technically a baby, fell asleep immediately after a satisfying meal. 7 years later, he had a new name, a new body, and a new baseline for what a 7-year-old could do. His name was now Zeke Eldrian, and his morning warm-up was a one-handed push-up with a boulder balanced on his feet. He hit 1,000 reps, launched the boulder into the distance, and looked at his own arms with quiet satisfaction. The dragon's blood had transformed him. Even the babies, who only swallowed a little, came out with bodies far beyond ordinary humans. But Zeke had absorbed every last drop, supercharged by a lifetime of prior cultivation that nobody in this era knew anything about. There was one problem though. On paper he was a 1-star warrior, the lowest possible rank in a system that went all the way to 10. For a man who had been a 10-star in a previous life, this was frankly insulting. He understood why the number of stars reflects compressed true source power, and his current body was still new, but it stung regardless. And on top of the star ranking issue, there was another problem waiting for him. This world was not the one he remembered. A millennium had passed, and things had gotten significantly stranger. The world now operated under a brutal principle: the strong consumed the weak, and power determined everything. The Lagan family had a strict internal hierarchy. Rookies were lesser dragons, soldiers were young dragons, captains were adult dragons, elites were elder dragons, and at the very bottom sat a classification reserved for those who failed or never qualified mock dragons fakes. Zeke was living on the outskirts of the main house, tended only by silent maids, with no instructor, no training partner, no education whatsoever. His mother had died young, his father had never once shown his face, and nobody seemed particularly interested in telling him what was going on. He tried asking the maid questions, she replied that she was not at liberty to say. He tried rephrasing, still not at liberty. He poked around the borders of what he was allowed to know. The maid stared at him like a piece of furniture. Fine. If nobody was going to train him, he would train himself just like he had done before. He built his strength in the forest, eating poisonous herbs as part of his conditioning, hunting boars for practice. One day, he noticed someone tailing him a faint trail of black mist he couldn't identify, something that hadn't existed in his previous era. He filed it away for later and kept moving, and when a massive wild boar charged him, he waited for the perfect angle and put a single punch through its gut. One hit, the boar dropped, one-shotted by a kid with 1 star and no formal training. His shadow watcher, a spy, assigned to keep tabs on the illegitimate child of the family head, watched this happen with his jaw somewhere on the floor. Zeke hoisted the boar onto his shoulder and walked home, already bored, already thinking about what came next. What came next arrived in the form of men with the Lagan emblem on their clothes. Standing in his living room with news, there was an entrance examination for the family's elite training institution, Dragon's Nest Academy. He was required to attend. Nobody had told him about the exam, nobody had given him any education, and nobody seemed to think this was a problem. Zeke bowed his head and pressed his knuckles against his temples, physically fighting the migraine this family kept giving him. He had no choice. Mandatory meant mandatory, so they dressed him in a uniform and took him to the main house. It had been 1,000 years since he last set foot there. He didn't say that out loud. At the exam site, while other students walked past in nervous clusters, a blue-haired kid named Langus broke formation and walked up to him. Langus was from Old Scale Village, timid but surprisingly perceptive, and he asked Zeke if he was okay because he looked like he was in some kind of trouble. Zeke, in full grumpy warrior mode, snapped at him. Then caught himself, noticed the kid had real power running through him, and apologized. They introduced themselves. Zeke admitted he had absolutely no idea what the exam was or what he was supposed to do in it. Langus looked at him, like he had just said he didn't know what gravity was. Before Langus could explain, a group of bullies led by a guy named Retin rolled up and immediately started mocking Langus. Retin called him a runt, told him he had no business attempting the exam, and made fun of his father for being a mock dragon, a fake. Zeke noticed Langus's fists clench, so he stepped in. He asked Retin with genuine curiosity how he already knew Langus was trash if the exam hadn't even happened yet. Retin didn't like that. He puffed up and threatened to remember Zeke's face. Zeke looked at him and thought, quietly, that young people these days had very short tempers. An examiner arrived and called everyone to order before things could escalate further, and Zeke and Langus joined the crowd, gathering around the test site. Langus finally got to explain. The exam required applicants to leave a scratch on a rock called the regeneration stone. The stone healed any minor scratch instantly and reflected brute force impact back at the attacker 100 times harder. Zeke looked at the rock, then looked at the crying kid, whose sword had just shattered against it, leaving the boy with broken arms, and felt genuinely, sincerely disappointed. He had survived drinking a full bottle of ancient dragon's blood as an infant. He had hunted a divine dragon in a past life. He had done 1,000 push-ups before breakfast, and they were asking him to scratch a rock. Langus, meanwhile, had gone pale. This was the rock that terrified everyone, and Zeke was acting like he'd been asked to open a jar. Student after student stepped up and failed, arms shattered, swords broken, pride demolished. Even skilled applicants were crumpling on impact. Zeke watched and ran the numbers. The stone reflected brute force but responded to properly channeled ether source power. That was the trick. He figured it out in about 30 seconds of observation. When his number was called 315, Langus grabbed his arm and begged him to withdraw. Zeke told him he was going to be fine, stepped forward, and when the examiner asked him to choose a weapon, said he wouldn't be needing one. The crowd started laughing. Even Langus covered his eyes. Zeke looked at the rock, identified the mineral, something that had apparently formed in the 1,000 years since his last life, and decided it was an interesting development. He powered up, let yellow light crawl around his arm, and threw a single punch using a technique he called Dragon Slayer combat form. The top of the regeneration stone exploded. The sound hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Dust rolled in every direction. When it cleared, the examiner was staring at Zeke, with an expression that could only be described as complete malfunction. Only a warrior of 4 stars or higher should have been capable of shattering that stone, and this kid had just done it with his bare hands. Zeke checked his arm, bleeding, uniform torn, and concluded that his training still wasn't good enough. He walked up to the examiner, asked how he did, got told he passed, and received a bottle of green liquid as a reward. He asked a junior examiner what it was and got a look of pure hatred in return. Langus, who had recovered from his shock enough to speak, told him it was a healing potion, a Ragan healing potion, which was apparently leagues above the store-bought kind. Zeke drank it. His torn arms sealed back together instantly, old wounds and new ones both gone in seconds. He stared at the empty bottle and mentally revised everything he knew about what this era was capable of. But there was no ether surge, no internal amplification, just healing. He filed that detail away. Then Langus's number was called, 414. The nervous kid walked down to the stone carrying a sword, and Zeke watched from his seat with full attention. Langus swung, he fell, got back up, still nothing, fell again. He was on his knees, eyes wet, with one attempt left, while Retin and his crew laughed from the stands. They called him the child of a half-dragon. They told him to give up. They told Zeke to his face that this proved Langus was exactly as weak as they'd always said. And that's when Zeke's voice cut through the humiliation like a blade. He told Langus to put the sword down and pick up a spear instead. The crowd went quiet with confusion. Retin's group started laughing again. Langus had never trained with a spear in his life, they said. What was the point? Zeke asked the examiner if switching weapons mid-test allowed. It was. He looked at Langus and asked him simply, did he want to leave like a loser? Langus got back on his feet, picked up a spear, and thought about his father, a man who was never allowed to enter Dragon's Nest, who had been mocked his entire life, who still raised his son with everything he had. He hadn't known Zeke for more than an hour, but something about the way this stranger believed in him made him want to believe in himself. He took a breath, felt the ether move differently through his body, with the spear in hand completely different from the sword. He charged, thrust the spear straight forward and hit. The shockwave rolled across the exam site. Retin's jaw dropped. The examiner checked his book, wrote down a pass and confirmed it out loud. Langus asked him to confirm it again, and then Zeke hugged him from behind, laughing, telling him yes, he actually did it. Tears, relief, joy, the whole thing at once. Langus had passed the exam that his bullies said he would fail. Retin and his group decided it was luck. They moved on. The entrance ceremony followed, and with it came the moment the family heads arrived to address the new students. Among the men walking toward them was a gloomy, imposing figure that Zeke immediately pointed out to Langus, asking who the ugly guy in the middle was. Langus nearly swallowed his own tongue and clamped his hand over Zeke's mouth. That was Balsa Elrigan, the head of the family, an 8-star warrior, Zeke's biological father. Zeke considered this information, looked at Balsa again, and concluded that he didn't like him, father or not. Balsa stepped forward and spoke only a handful of words to the assembled students, become the flesh and blood of the Ragan. But those words came wrapped in an 8-star aura that pressed down on every person in the courtyard like a physical weight. Students trembled. Lang gasped that he couldn't breathe. Even trained adults flinched at the edges. Zeke stood straight and felt nothing except quiet, burning hatred. When Balsa left and the pressure lifted, the examiner announced dormitory assignments. Zeke was placed in the East Wing. Langus was placed in the East Wing. When Zeke finally found his room after getting lost for an embarrassingly long time, he threw open the door to greet his new roommate. Langus was already sitting there, smiling, saying he had been getting lonely. Zeke stared at him, then concluded that the universe must have an opinion about this. 1 month into Dragon's Nest, the real training began, and it was immediately clear that Zeke operated on a different planet from everyone else. While the class practiced the Dragon's Breath technique, a breathing method developed by the 15th head of House Lejan, Zeke was doing it while balancing boulders on his head, with dumbbells in each hand. Their instructor noticed. He couldn't figure out how this kid with no recorded teacher was already beyond the curriculum, but he couldn't dismiss what he was seeing either. What the instructor didn't know and couldn't have guessed was that Dragon's Breath was originally Zeke's invention. In his past life, he had created it as a way to draw ether from the air while moving, and simplified it so his entire clan could learn it. It had apparently survived 1,000 years, been refined by multiple generations, and was now being taught back to its creator as introductory material. He found this genuinely charming, but he also found it limiting. The current version only worked when standing still, which made it, in his professional opinion, entirely useless in a real fight. After training, while the other students barely had the strength to lift their chopsticks, Zeke ate dinner like a man who had just returned from a pleasant walk. He looked over at Langus, who was drooping into his food, and told him to eat more if he didn't want to run out of fuel. That's when a girl walked up to their table, confident, straight-backed, with the unmistakable air of someone accustomed to deference. Zeke looked at her and asked who she was. Langus nearly choked on his rice. This was Leica, the family head's daughter. The person nobody in the academy was supposed to approach without permission. Zeke told Langus to calm down, since he was also the family head's son, illegitimate. But still, both Langus and Leica stared at him for a long moment. Leica gathered herself and got to the point. She wanted Zeke as a subordinate. She would back him politically, protect him as an illegitimate child, and in exchange, he would help her become the next family head. Zeke told her he wasn't interested. She assumed he wanted the head position for himself and pushed harder. He stabbed the table with his dinner knife, let a wave of pressure roll off his body, and told her with complete calm that he had no interest in serving anyone, in the family's politics, or in anything related to succession. Leica felt that pressure hit her like a wall and went pale. Then she challenged him to a duel. News spread through the academy in minutes. By the time they reached the training ground, half the student body was already watching. Langus was panicking, Zeke was stretching. Leica stood at the center of the arena, with her training sword driven into the ground, lightning crackling faintly at the edge of her aura, staring at him like she intended to teach him the full meaning of consequence. She asked if he was ready to be taught some manners. Zeke asked her, genuinely, why she was so worked up about fighting him. She explained 5 heirs were competing for the family head position. Zeke was the only one, without great house blood behind him. She needed every advantage she could get. Then she lunged at him. Her first strike cratered the ground where he had been standing. He had stepped back without hurrying. She swung again. He moved again and again, faster and faster, while Zeke's did nothing but walk around the arena at a casual pace. The crowd cheered for Leica. She was faster than anyone they had seen. Her swordsmanship, precise and powerful, a genuine prodigy. What they didn't realize was that Zeke wasn't trying. Leica figured this out about 30 seconds in, and it made her furious. She screamed at him to actually fight her, instead of just running his mouth about how fast she was. So he did. One punch to the chest, pulled so far back it shouldn't have done much. It sent her skidding backwards across the arena, coughing blood, dropping to her knees. The crowd went completely silent. Leica looked up from the ground and asked why she couldn't land a single hit on someone who was clearly the same star rank she was. He told her plainly. He could read every move she made from the way she breathed, the twitch of her muscles, the smallest shift in her eyes. And he had decades more experience than her in this life alone. She got back up and came at him again. He sent her into the far wall hard enough to leave a person-shaped imprint in the stone, and then slowly, from within the cloud of dust, she stood back up. Something had shifted in her. Zeke felt it before he saw it. A blaring aura burst from Leica's body, golden and electric, circling her like a living thing. She had broken through to 2 stars. Right here, in the middle of getting beaten up. The crowd exploded. A 2-star at her age was nearly unheard of, and Leica thanked Zeke with rage in her eyes for pushing her there. Then she activated the Thunderlight Flash and hit him, before he could move. Lightning tore through him, then another strike, then another. Zeke took the hits, and smiled through every single one, because while she was hitting him, he was studying, feeling the way the lightning moved, tracing the path it took through ether, learning the pattern from the inside out. And when he'd seen enough, something inside him clicked into place. His body started sparkling. Leica stopped mid-swing and stared. Zeke told her he had no idea how it had happened, but while she was hitting him, he had been running Dragon King's breath the whole time, and the lightning energy had bonded with it, built up inside him, and resolved itself into control. He had just learned to use lightning by getting struck by it repeatedly, on purpose, for fun. Leica looked at him and could not find the words. Zeke told her that he had also, incidentally, reached 2 stars during the fight, borrowing the threshold from her, in a sense. And then he created a new technique on the spot, named it Dragon Slaying Arts Tempest of Thunder, hit her with a combination of lightnings and force that knocked her completely off her feet, and said calmly that the match was over. She lay on the ground, barely able to move, and he walked over and told her she had given him a genuinely tough fight, and asked when they could do it again. She stared at him like he had grown a second head. Across the family compound, Balsa was clearing out an entire dungeon of monsters by himself when a messenger arrived with a report. Leica had advanced to 2 stars. The messenger said a remarkable achievement for her age. Balsa didn't look up. He told the man to come back when she'd actually done something with it. The messenger swallowed and added, Leica also lost to fight to Zeke, the illegitimate son. Balsa paused. He remembered the woman who had given birth to Zeke. She had talent, he admitted, but she had died up before the boy was even born. There was no one who could have trained him. And yet Zeke had just defeated a 2-star prodigy, and apparently reached 2 stars himself during the same fight. Balsa's jaw set. He told his men begin the first trial early. His attendant protested it was too soon. Balsa cut him off and added one more instruction. Summon Freya. She would be overseeing the trial personally. Because this child, Balsa said with something close to anticipation showing through his usual mask, was interesting. Back at the academy, things continued with Zeke operating on his own wavelength. The day after the duel, Leica found Zeke at training, and swallowing what must have been a considerable amount of pride asked him to train her. She explained that she had spent years working toward the family head position. That losing to her meant a future of political marriage to someone she'd never chosen, and that she was not going to let that happen. She threw her ego on the ground and asked him to make her stronger. He thought about it for exactly long enough to make her panic, then said yes, because he saw someone genuinely teachable. A moment later Langus asked the same thing Zeke just to him too, and then Leica asked about Langus and Zeke told her that Langus was someone worth investing in. A week later a red-haired woman appeared at the academy, unannounced, moving so quietly that Langus didn't sense her presence until she was already reaching for Leica's ear. Leica's reflexes kicked in and she stepped back just in time. The woman smiled and called her reflexes sharp. The instructors introduced her as Freya, a member of the Black Dragon Corps, a 6-star warrior. The entire student body started trembling. Zeke stood there unbothered and told her that her concealment technique was interesting, but her entrance was nothing to write home about. Freya studied him carefully. She was beginning to understand why the family head had been paying attention. Freya told the students they would be undertaking a survival test, spend 1 month on Poison Dragon Mountain while keeping a crystal orb safe. The mountain was home to venomous beasts and plants so toxic that brushing one could kill an ordinary person. Panic swept the room. Zeke remembered training there in his previous life and made a mental note to not say that out loud. Freya added the twist. Senior students from the inner building would be actively hunting them during the test, trying to steal their orbs. More panic. Langus looked like he's reconsidering all of his life choices. Leica pointed out that most seniors were at least 2 stars, which meant the survival rate for juniors was going to be grim. Zeke agreed and suggested everyone pair up or form groups, then casually announced he would be going solo because it was more fun that way. They had 5 days to prepare and choose a fighting style manual from the Ragan archives. Zeke told Langus to pick the spear manual, because the entrance exam had already shown that was his natural fit. He told Leica to pick the axe manual. She looked at him like he had lost his mind. He still told her the axe would cover what she was currently lacking and walked off. On the day of the test, Leica put together a group herself, Langus, 2 commoners named Celine and Raymond, and the unspoken understanding that this team was going to have to survive on coordination. Zeke waved them off, strolled into the forest at his own pace. After everyone else had already sprinted in, and then the moment he found a cluster of seniors waiting in ambush, laughed out loud and told them he had been waiting for them. Fear crossed their faces immediately. A first year wasn't supposed to be happy to see them. He hit them like a storm front. A week in, Freya's instruct team gathered to file their progress report. About 30% of the first years had dropped out. The ones who remained were adapting faster than expected. Then someone brought up the upperclassmen. Silence. Freya yelled at them to say it. The upperclassmen were running away from Zeke. He had turned the predators into prey, was actively hunting them across the mountain, and had already knocked out every single one who stood against him. Freya absorbed this, noted that Zeke had walked in last, moved alone, and apparently had never considered himself the prey. She smiled and told her team to release the package at dawn. The package turned out to be a 3-star golem, a monster, beyond anything the first years were supposed to face. The instructors panicked. Freya said not to worry, it was calibrated to target only 2-star class students and above, which meant only Zeke and Leica would be in danger. This was, she noted without blinking, an order from the family head. Balsa wanted to see what Zeke was made of. The next day, the students felt something shift in the forest, something massive, something with no life force, just weight and intent. Leica's team stumbled into at first a stone golem towering over the trees, and none of their attacks could leave so much as a scratch. Leica figured out fast that only aura-coated strikes from a 2-star or higher could damage it. She told her team to run while she distracted it. Her team refused to leave. Instead, they coordinated one holding a shield position, so Leica could circle to the golem's back, and she let loose the full force of her Heavenly Thunder technique. In one massive strike, the explosion rocked the forest. The golems stopped moving. Leica's power was completely drained, and then the golem grabbed her from behind. It had not stopped moving, it had simply paused. Her teammates screamed. Langus jabbed it with his spear, it didn't budge. Then a tree came flying out of nowhere, and hit the golem in the side hard enough to make it drop her. Zeke stepped out of the tree line with an excited grin, fascinated, genuinely fascinated by the fact that a rock fonts existed, and he had never seen one before. He told the kids to back up, they backed up. He threw the golem across the clearing, punched it in the head with Dragon Destroyer form, followed with a burst of internal energy, and disassembled it from the inside. He announced that he had had a bit of fun, and that was that. The rest of the month passed without major incident, and when the test ended, most of the surviving first years had achieved 1-star rank through sheer necessity. Zeke was summoned to Balsa's office. Freya walked him there and spent the entire trip begging him to behave himself. He asked why he should. She told him Balsa would kill him, even if he was a child. He told her that was dramatic. They arrived. Freya knocked and announced herself. Balsa told them to enter. Balsa asked Zeke immediately why he had attacked the upperclassmen. Zeke responded by asking if there had been a rule against that. Because nobody had told him there was one. The exam said to survive a month on the mountain with an orb. He had done that. He had also spent the month however he liked. If Balsa wanted different behavior, he should have specified in advance. Freya looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Balsa unleashed his full 8-star aura, the same pressure that had buckled the entire student body at the ceremony. Freya dropped to her knees. Zeke told Balsa to stop doing that every time he felt challenged, because it was getting annoying. Balsa stared at him. He then, after a long moment, said that Zeke's behavior was exactly as reported, and that despite everything, he would be receiving a reward for defeating the golem. The choice: access to one item from the dragon treasury, a vault of artifacts and relics collected over 1,000 years, or the right to enter the second floor of Dragon Hall, which housed books including ones now considered forbidden. Zeke asked why he couldn't have both. Balsa told him to get out. Freya grabbed Zeke and dragged him into the hallway while he called back to Balsa with one last comment that, as long as Balsa kept suppressing his own emotions, he would never grow truly strong. After the door closed, Freya screamed at him in the hallway. He said that had been him holding back. She asked him for the first time with genuine confusion rather than frustration who exactly he was. He told her, same answer every time. Deep down, Freya was already planning to pull birth records and read every line. When asked which reward he wanted, Zeke chose Dragon Hall's second floor. He wanted knowledge. This era was 1,000 years ahead of what he remembered, and he intended to catch up. Langus was almost vibrating with excitement. When they went to the hall, it was a chance to find martial arts manuals they had never seen before. Leica was already calculating which texts would give her the biggest advantage. The interior of Dragon Hall was enormous, layered, and filled with knowledge that spanned centuries, and within the first hour, Zeke had found something that genuinely rattled him. 900 years ago, a crack had appeared in the dimensional wall, a rift. Beyond it was a chaotic world called Kunseeth, the Chaos Realm, filled with monsters known simply as Chaos. The people of that world carried primal energy to survive them. The Lagan family had fought alongside those people, and 4 great warriors from the Chaos Realm had married into the Eldrian house Taporna, Fafnild, Levias, and Bahamut. These 4 became the ancestors of the 4 great Eldrian families that stood to this day. Zeke lay on the floor of Dragon Hall, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything at once. That was why he hadn't recognized the black mist around the boar he hunted years ago. That was why Leica's lightning carried that particular quality. Both came from another world. And then he found something even more interesting: references to a thing called magic. A completely different force from ether, and not a single book explaining how to actually use it. He started yelling about this. A disembodied voice told him to maintain silence in the library. He yelled at the voice to come out and show itself. Books started moving on their own. He grabbed one and demanded answers. Invisible threads wrapped around him and threw him out of the building. He landed on his feet outside Dragon Hall, pointed at the closed doors, and told whoever was inside to show him magic properly. His friends found him standing there shouting at a building. Langus showed him the spear manual he had borrowed, Cloudwater spear technique. Celine had found Windblossom sword technique. Raymond had studied the Eldrian Guardian style. Leica had taken the Heavy Wave greatsword technique and its revised version, improved by the 15th head of the family. Zeke went still when he heard that. The 15th head had refined his techniques, improved them, stored them, and left improved versions right next to the originals. He realized, standing in the courtyard of Dragon Hall, that his past life had rippled forward through 1,000 years in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had thought coming to school would be boring. He had been wrong. 5 years passed. The children who had stumbled through an entrance exam and a nightmare mountain had become teenagers, sharper, faster, and built for actual combat. Zeke spent those 5 years training his squad without mercy, and the results were undeniable. Langus had refined his spear work to the point where even senior students couldn't find gaps in his technique. Celine had developed multi-strike sword arts with genuine power behind each blow. Raymond had grown into a tactical shield fighter who could seamlessly switch between offense and defense. And Leica, who had entered those years already talented, came out the other side as something genuinely dangerous. Zeke's training method was simple: take attacks directly and stay calm while analyzing the enemy. The results were brutal to live through and extraordinary to observe. In the wider world, things were shifting too. Balsa received a report about a rift appearing in the abundant dragon forest, and within it, an 80% chance of magic water existing. Magic water, the thing that changed everything. Drinking it gave a warrior a new constitution, the ability to convert ether into a different force entirely, called mana, which opened the door to magic. The world had been reorganizing itself around magic for years, and the Lagan family was the only one of the 8 great houses, with no magic spring of its own. Every mage they had was a veteran, who had personally conquered a rift. They were outnumbered by houses that could simply grow mages from a spring. Rifts were their only path forward, and this one had appeared right on the border, with the Cabarrus family's territory. Balsa ordered preparation for a territorial dispute, and sent word to every Dragon's Nest branch, begin a selection trial immediately. Back at the academy, Freya arrived to announce that for the next 3 days, students from all 4 halls east, west, north, south would be fighting each other. Whoever survived the selection would receive a special mission. Zeke's face lit up. The format was a knockout tournament. 7 fighters per hall. Winner stays on. First to eliminate 4 opponents wins. The order of participants was fixed before the match, and could not be changed. Strategy was part of the format. The top-year students tried to dominate the selection process immediately, with a guy named Rick, assuming his seniors would make all the decisions. Lika shut that down fast. She had reached 3 stars news that visibly terrified Rick's entire group when she let her aura out. She said representatives should come from actual strength, not seniority. If anyone wanted to argue, she was happy to argue in combat. Zeke cut in and suggested they just fight until the 7 slots were filled. Lika called that too violent and proposed voluntary preliminaries instead. Zeke volunteered himself and then volunteered Langus, Raymond, and Celine before any of them could object. They stared at him in horror. He told them they had been training for this. It was time to find out if it worked. The 3 of them had no choice, they went in. Minutes later, Rick's senior squad was unconscious on the ground, defeated by a 2-star, Langus with a spear, Raymond with a shield, and Celine with her sword. Rick himself was last, and he charged Zeke with the great strength fist technique, and Zeke punched him into the far wall in a single exchange. Zeke told him that stars were indicators, not guarantees. The heart destroyed means the fight is over. Rick's rank meant nothing if his technique had gaps. Rick refused to accept this, tried again, and discovered that Zeke did not revise his conclusions after the second attempt either. The 7 representatives were chosen, and when they gathered in the arena, the full weight of the event was immediately visible. Students from every hall filled the stands. Air was thick with rivalry and sizing up. A girl with blonde hair crashed into Lika from behind Sandy, her cousin, daughter of the Toporna family head. Sandy immediately assessed Langus and the others as talentless commoners and said so to their faces. Zeke told her she was going to trip eventually if she kept looking down at everyone. Sandy went cold and looked at Lika, asking who this illegitimate child thought he was. A North Hall representative named Aegis stepped in to calm things down before the tournament started, and the matchup stones were drawn. East Hall versus North Hall, West Hall versus South Hall, finals between winners. The West Hall's candidate was Vanail Fafnilde Elragon, the West Wing's pick for next family head, and from the moment Zeke got a clear look at him, he understood why Lika had mentioned him. The West Hall fighters were different, not just trained, forged. And Retin, the bully from the entrance exam, was among them, already a 3-star. The tournament began. Rick went first for East Hall and lost his opening match, rattled by the crowd and the pressure. Merlin went second and lost too. The momentum was against them before it had even properly started. Zeke found Rick afterward and smacked him on the head, told him to relax his shoulders, and explained that the great strength fist art requires a loose body to concentrate power. Tension scatters it. Rick visibly felt the difference the moment Zeke demonstrated. He screamed with new conviction and ran back toward the arena. Langus was next. His opponent was the tank of the North Hall, a giant of a kid who made Langus look like a walking stick by comparison. The crowd mocked him immediately. The usual crowd always did. Zeke pulled Langus aside and told him something simple. Look at what weapon the guy is using. Respond to the sword the way you always do, and stop thinking about everything else. Langus walked into the ring, locked his focus and waited. The giant swung hard and fast, trying to overwhelm him with size and speed. Langus dodged, retreated, circled. His opponent grew frustrated, leaped for an overhead slam, and Langus drove his spear through the opening, hitting center mass. The giant flew across the ring and hit the ground hard. Match over. East Hall erupted. Langus exhaled and quietly thanked whatever forces had kept him alive through that. The momentum turned. East Hall strung together 3 more wins off Langus's breakthrough, pulling themselves into a winning position. Then came the sixth match, Leica versus Sandy. The crowd understood immediately what this was. Two girls from the same family, wielding the same thunder spirit swordship, one of them the mentor who had taught the other everything she once knew. Sandy moved first. She vanished, reappeared behind Leica, and almost landed a finishing blow before Leica's instincts kicked in. The exchange was brutal. Sandy was faster, more experienced, and had clearly continued to improve while Leica was here at Dragon's Nest. She pushed Leica across the arena, cut her arm, forced her backwards, and began to lecture her mid-fight about her bad habit of swinging wildly when cornered. Leica took a lightning strike to the chest, fell to her knees. Sandy told her to give up. Leica remembered what Zeke had told her before the match. Her problem was losing herself during combat, seeing only her own sword and nothing else. The 5 years of training had been specifically for this. Stay calm, observe, let the technique come to you. Sandy leaped for the kill. The hit connected, dust everywhere, and Leica walked out of the dust, battered but standing, with a smile on her face. She told Sandy she had finally seen the Thunderclap greatsword arts clearly by taking them head-on and watching them from the inside. Sandy froze. Leica closed the gap so fast that Sandy couldn't track her feet, and started landing strikes that mirrored Sandy's own technique back at her, but sharper, cleaner, adapted. She had learned Sandy's art by surviving Sandy's art. In the stands, Zeke explained to Rick what was happening. Leica used to lose herself in the heat of battle. Now she had the presence of mind to calmly observe while fighting. By looking at a sword style identical to her own, she had reached a new realm. Sandy unleashed everything she had left. Leica fought through it, took it head-on, and then announced her own version, the Heavenly Thunder. The Thunderclap arts were made on her own terms. Sandy went down. Before passing out, she admitted that Leica had gotten stronger. East Hall was declared the winner of these finals. And then in a move nobody had expected, the instructor announced that the matches would continue anyway, all the way to the end. Leica asked Zeke who Aegis was, since she hadn't had to face him. He confirmed that Aegis was above the level of every other competitor they had seen. Aegis stepped into the ring against Zeke, and made it clear immediately, he was not there to perform, he was there to fight a real opponent, and everything he had was coming out. His first move erased his sword's presence from Zeke's perception. Zeke barely dodged and was genuinely surprised. Aegis followed with a sword art that moved like a wave of water, reading like a natural force rather than a technique, and Zeke had to genuinely adjust his position to avoid it. Then Aegis shifted to a lightning-type form and closed the distance at a speed that forced Zeke to acknowledge out loud that he was a legitimate genius. The crowd watched, two people operating at a level that simply didn't match the rest of what they had seen that day. For 2 hours, they fought Aegis throwing every technique he had, Zeke dodging, studying, learning the shape of the man's entire martial system from the outside. When Zeke finally decided he had seen enough, he created a new technique in real-time aerial energy punches, launched from a distance and ended the match. Aegis's sword broke. He lay on the ground, exhausted, smiling, and said he had a long way to go. The arena itself was cracked and smoking. The students in the stands had needed to protect themselves from the shockwave. Zeke was declared the winner. He started casually stretching in the broken arena, while Leica scolded him for wrecking the venue. The West Hall dominated their side, without apparent difficulty, Vinail crushing a girl named Laya from the South Hall, in a way that didn't quite make sense given the actual gap in their strength. Zeke noticed something was off about how Laya had fought. She had looked constrained, like her power wasn't flowing right, but he didn't know the details yet, so he held the observation without sharing it. The finals were East Hall versus West Hall. Before they started, Vinail found Leica alone near a spring, and mocked her, suggested that if he became family head, she might end up as his wife. She slapped his hand away and walked off. He turned to his aide Alan with a quiet, cold instruction. Alan nodded. He knew what to do. The first match of the finals, Rick versus a West Hall dagger fighter who moved with savage precision. The guy sliced Rick apart in the opening exchange, mocked him for thinking he had changed, and went in for a finisher. Rick, battered and bleeding, remembered Zeke's instruction: relax, gather the power into one point, and when the dagger fighter came in for a third time, Rick grabbed the blade with his bare hand and put his fist through the man's chest. The dagger fighter hit the wall. Rick raised his head and screamed. Merlin went next and lost badly. The West Hall fighter didn't stop when she went down, stepping on her to drive the point home. The argument that followed was sharp and loud. Sandy and Aegis confronted the fighter, stepped in to defend his man, saying they operated as if it were a real battlefield, and that real combat had no limits. The referee broke it up and declared the match. Retin stepped forward for the next match and called out Langus by name, asking if he wanted to be humiliated the same way he had been back in the village. Langus told Retin he was not running away this time, he was ready to surpass him. Before the match started, Zeke's voice entered Langus's head, a technique recreating an earlier experience, and left him with one line. Clouds drift freely. Water flows endlessly. Langus didn't fully understand it. He stepped into the ring anyway. Retten's specialty was counterattacks. He had built his entire style around reversing his opponent's momentum. Every move Langus tried to land came back at him worse. Retten threw him down, kicked him like he was nothing, and told him that the child of a fake could never become strong. Langus covered his head, his fighting spirit flickered, and then he saw his father, fishing by a lakeside, watching clouds move across the water's surface and quoting those same words Zeke had just sent into his mind, the words his father had told him years ago, the same words Zeke had chosen. Something unlocked. Langus blocked Retten's next attack and hit back. 3 stars appeared on his chest he had broken through mid-fight. Retten stared at him like the ground had shifted under his feet. He swung again. Langus moved around it like water around a stone, not blocking it, not countering, just flowing it, redirecting it, slipping past. Retten couldn't land a hit. He swung harder, faster, it, more desperately, and Langus drifted through every attack. Then Langus got close, and his spear went wild, not with chaos, but with an overwhelming current that Retten simply could not contain. One strike to the chest sent Retten flying. He hit the ground and didn't get up. The referee called it for East Hall. Langus stood there confused, asking his teammates what had just happened. They told him he had won, that he had reached 3 stars, and that his finishing move looked like a water dragon ascending a waterfall. Tears dropped. He genuinely hadn't expected to be standing while Retten was on the ground. Zeke revealed that the technique was the Rising Dragon Piercer, recorded in the 2nd volume of the Cloudwater Spearstyle style, which Langus had never read. He had arrived at a technique in the 2nd volume by mastering the essence of the first, on his own, in the middle of a match. Zeke smiled and said nothing about the fact that he had written both volumes himself in a previous life. The match continued. Celine narrowly lost hers. Raymond won his with everything he had. The scoreboard tightened. When Laika stepped up for her match against Alan, something went wrong within the first 30 seconds. Her lightning simply stopped working. Then her ether. Then her ability to move at full strength. She had been poisoned. Sometime before the match, something had been planted on her, something that activated the moment she tried to use ether. She realized this mid-fight. Alan kept swinging. She kept defending without power, absorbing streaks that would have been minor with ether but were increasingly dangerous without it. Alan raised his weapon to end it. Sandy crashed in from the stands and blocked the blow, demanding to know what Alan thought he was doing. The argument exploded. Sandy accused Alan of trying to kill Laika. He denied it. Aegis backs Anthony, pointing out that launching that attack against someone who clearly couldn't use ether was objectively reckless. Vanail stepped in for Alan. Cold and unmoved. Real combat, he said, means crushing the opponent completely. Their weakness is their own fault. The referee silenced everyone, declared the match for West Hall, and had the arena cleared. Aegis carried Laika out. Sandy gave her a recovery potion. As they passed Zeke, Aegis said quietly that he had noticed something was wrong since Laia's match and he could only hope Zeke stayed safe. Zeke stepped into the ring. Vanail was already talking loud, confident, listing all the reasons Zeke had no chance. Zeke walked up to him mid-sentence and punched him in the mouth. One hit. Vanail hit the wall hard enough to leave a crater. The arena went silent. Vanail pulled himself upright, bleeding, and tried to understand how he was on the far side of the room already. Zeke told him he was there to give him the real combat he had been asking for. Vanail activated his wind magic, a family technique from House Fafneld. Invisible strikes that even experienced fighters struggled to track. Zeke watched the airflow patterns like he was reading text and stepped out of every attack without hurrying. Vanail hit him twice more in the pattern face, neck, heart, 3 times over, and told him that if this were real, he would be dead 3 times. Vensil screamed and pushed out everything he had, filling the arena with invisible cutting wind. The students in the stands had to shield themselves. Even watching was dangerous. Zeke walked through it. Venil collapsed to his knees, exhausted, out of tricks, staring up at someone who had read his every move like a familiar text. He grabbed Zeke's ankle and injected the ether stealing soul poison, directly the same thing he had used on Laika. His wind magic erupted. It hit Zeke and sent him back. The crowd gasped. Vanail stood up laughing. It was finally over. Laika, watching from the infirmary doorway, shook her head and said simply, "That's not going to work on him." She was right. Zeke identified the poison in his system with seconds, looked at Vanail and told him that he understood now why his opponents had all fallen so easily. A poison that activates on ether. Clever engineering, genuinely impressive work. Then he exhaled and the poison left his body in a single breath. Vanail looked at the empty air where his killing technique used to be. Zeke told him, "Poisons are meaningless against a body that has been trained this thoroughly." And the fact that he needed poison said more about his lack of confidence in his own strength than it did about his cleverness. Vinale's breaking point surfaced then, the years of being compared to geniuses, failing to measure up, his mother's voice telling him he was worthless without the head position, the grinding humiliation of being ordinary in a family of extraordinary people. He had found poison when nothing else worked, and it had felt like a lifeline. And now that lifeline had just been casually exhaled away. He lunged at Zeke with his most lethal poison needles and a killing smoke that even he struggled to detoxify. He released it at close range, willing to breathe it himself if it meant winning. Zeke caught the needles with his teeth, looked fine, asked if that was the last move. Vinale crashed to the ground. Zeke grabbed him before he could fully fall and told him to listen. He said the only thing that determines strength is the thirst to win, not martial arts talent, not ether manipulation skill, the craving itself. He told Vinale the iron fan didn't suit him, something with a longer handle would, an umbrella, specifically, which had its own long history as a weapon. Vinale stared at him. Zeke told him that on a real battlefield, anything goes as long as you win. His thinking wasn't wrong, he was just applying it in the wrong place. Then he told Vinale come to him, he would forge him into exactly what he wanted to be. He delivered an uppercut that sent Vinale into the air, knocked him out, and told him, still rising, to come find him when he woke up. The instructor ended the match. East Hall was declared the winner. Langus, Raymond, Rick, and Celine screamed until their voices gave out. Even Aegis and his team applauded. Later that evening, all representatives from all 4 halls were called to dinner with the senior instructor Menrich. Zeke was already halfway through a chicken leg by the time the instructor walked in. Menrich apologized for the wait, told them to eat, and then explained what the special mission was. A special rift had appeared within Lagan territory, one with unusual restrictions. Only 7 people of 3-star rank or below could enter. Anyone higher was physically expelled by the rift's barrier. Even the family head couldn't bypass the conditions. Inside the rift, a very high probability of magic water. The family's regular 3-star soldiers were stretched thin from the surge in rift appearances, so the responsibility had fallen to these students, the best 3 stars and below the selection had produced. There was also one more complication. The rift had appeared adjacent to Cabarrus territory, one of the other 8 great houses, and the Cabarrus family would definitely want it. The East Hall had won the selection, so their representative would lead the team formation. Menrich turned to Zeke. Zeke turned to Leica and told her to do it. Leica stared at him. He told her that if he chose, he would just pick himself, which wasn't useful. And if she was going to become family head, she needed to learn to judge people with her own eyes. He told the instructor he was transferring the representative role to Leica, asked if that was allowed, and was told it was fine, though they noted that leading the recovery team would put him one step closer to the family head position. Zeke said he wasn't interested in becoming family head. The room went quiet. Aegis said that by becoming head, he would have everything the Lagan family could offer. Zeke told him there was only one thing he was seeking, the pinnacle of martial arts, and that was it. He told Leica to pick whoever she wanted and stepped back. Leica stood up and made her selections herself. Zeke, Sandy, Aegis, Lai Allen, and Vinale. Across the territory, in the Cabarrus family compound, their family head, a cold-eyed man with a cigar and dark glasses, was being briefed on the same rift. He learned that the Lagan family had already moved, that the rift favored 3 stars and below, and that a team of academy students was being sent to clear it. He was surprised that the lizards were sending children. He asked how many bracelets of deception they had left. The answer was 4. He told his attendant to use all 4. He didn't care about saving them. He wanted the children wiped out, the rift denied, and Balsa broken. He smiled slowly, thinking about how entertaining it would be to watch. Back at Dragon's Nest, Zeke called his remaining squad, Langus, Raymond, Celine, Rick, and Merlin, to the training ground one last time before he left. He gave each of them a specific assignment. Rick and Merlin, basic training, running, building the foundation. Raymond, he had retrieved a regeneration stone, and Raymond was to practice blocking its reflected impact with a shield direct full force deflection as a training method. Celine strike the regeneration stone with her sword, using ether, but hit the exact same spot every single time. Not close, the exact same spot. She failed immediately. Her strikes scattered across 3 different points. He showed her what focused intent looked like, by shattering the stone in a single concentrated point, then handed her the task. Langus, he floated a feather using wind technique borrowed from Vinale's wind key. Yes, he had learned it after their match, and told Langus his job was to surrender himself to the feather's flow. Not follow it, not catch it, surrender to it. Langus watched the feather float and felt his next several weeks becoming increasingly miserable. Zeke ran off to join Leica and the recovery team, leaving Langus with a spear, a floating feather, and Rick's encouraging hand on his shoulder. Leica had assembled a team that looked like it was held together with tension and past grievances, and she was fully aware of this. Sandy hated Vinail for the poison incident. Vinail kept his face neutral and said nothing. Alan stuck close to Vinail. Laya stayed quietly composed. Zeke observed all of it, and concluded that a team that didn't trust each other was a dangerous variable in a live rift situation. He also observed that Vinail accepted the staff he had handed him before departure, the substitute umbrella, and had started moving with it in a way that was already sharper than anything he had done with the iron fan. Aegis noticed too. He saw Vinail take down a charging deer inside the rift's outer zone with clean, economical strikes, and thought quietly that Zeke had somehow created a martial art specifically tailored to one person's characteristics. He did not have a framework for explaining this. 1 week into their journey through the rift's forest interior, the team was exhausted, irritated, and had fought more chaos monsters than any of them had been told to expect. Sandy was on the edge of snapping. Vinail pointed out that the wind had shifted, and the exit was close. Sandy was barely willing to take his word for it. They argued. Leica ordered them forward anyway. They broke out of the forest into a rocky terrains, still unpleasant, but ahead of them, a pillar of light. The Chaos Stone. Aegis confirmed it. The Chaos Stone was the source of the rift, continuously releasing dark energy, corrupting nearby creatures, maintaining the dimensional breach, and breeding the instinct to slaughter into every living thing inside. To complete the mission, they had to destroy it. The magic water would be nearby. The rocky terrain between the forest and the stone had been unnervingly quiet. No monsters, no ambushes. They were still processing this, when something crashed out of the sky and hit the ground nearby, with enough force to shake the rocks. The dust cleared. Zeke stood there, cheerful, brushing himself off, delighted to see them. He pointed to a massive dead chaos monster lying in the distance, and mentioned he had dealt with it a few minutes ago. Leica looked at the monster, looked at Zeke, then realized the reason they hadn't encountered anything on the way to the Chaos Stone was that Zeke had already killed it all. The team agreed unanimously. Zeke was insane. Zeke pointed out the magic water pooled beneath the stone and told them to start collecting. They brought out their prepared bottles and filled them, but Aegis noted that even with all the water available, it might only be enough for a few people to gain the full magical constitution. Leica noted that the water was transparent, unusual, since magic water's color typically indicated which attribute it would grant. Before they could finish the discussion, Zeke grabbed Leica and threw her to the ground. A magic blast hit the wall where she had been standing. Above them, 3 figures. The Cabarrus family's wild dogs, and their leader was already impressed that anyone had managed to dodge. The team snapped into defensive positions. Zeke, for the first time in this scene, looked genuinely alert rather than entertained, because he had sensed them entering the special territory earlier. He had been waiting. He had expected them. He had wanted them to show up, and now they were here, armed with the Cabarrus family's bracelets of deception, the same tools that had fed poison into Leica during the finals, that had sabotaged Laya's match, that had made a 3-star warrior fight as if she had no power at all. 4 bracelets, 4 attempts to kill or cripple members of this team. 3 wild dogs stood above them, and the team below had a chaos stone to destroy, magic water to protect, and no way out of the rift until the job was done. Leica looked at Zeke. He was already smiling, not the polite smile, the one that meant things were about to get genuinely interesting. What followed was not a clean victory. These were not overconfident senior students or stunted arena combatants. The Pyrrhus operatives were experienced, equipped, and willing to use the bracelets without hesitation to disable Ether at the worst possible moment. The first attack came fast, targeting multiple members. Simultaneously divide the group, isolate the strongest, and let the bracelets do the rest. Leica organized the team's response with the clarity of someone who had spent 5 years being trained by a man who thought 3 versus 1 was a warm-up exercise. Sandy coordinated with Aegis, both of them working to contain the bracelet-wearing operative who was trying to flank the group. Vinail used the staff, the spectral wind umbrella art that Zeke had built for him from scratch, and moved with a sharp that not even Aegis had fully anticipated. Alan fought beside Vinail without being told, falling into a rhythm with him that they had never explicitly practiced, but that clicked like pieces that had always fit. Laya, quiet and composed, exploited openings the others created and shut down the bracelet user targeting Leica before the device could activate. It was a team that had been forged in grievance and competition and near disasters, and in the middle of a real fight, all of that noise fell away. They were protecting each other because they had to. And somewhere between the third coordinated strike and the fifth, Sandy covered Alan from a hit she had no obligation to stop. They stopped being a team assembled by a roster and became something else. Zeke went for the leader directly, and this was a different experience. than anything the tournament had offered. The Barris commander had actual combat history. His magic was built for killing, not performing. Zeke took a hit, absorbed it, read the pattern behind it, and began to move differently the way he always moved when he was done observing and ready to finish. The leader activated a bracelet directly on him. Ether seal, the same thing that had stopped Lit and Laya. Zeke breathed out. The seal broke. The Cabarrus commander stared at him the way Vanail had stared at him in the arena. Zeke told him that sealing his ether was like trying to flood a lake. There was simply nothing left to seal. Then he hit the man with everything he had been holding back, and the fight was over. 3 wild dogs down, 0 bracelets used successfully against Zeke. 2 used on teammates, both broken by Taisits who had the presence of mind not to panic. When the dust finally settled, the team stood around the Chaos Stone. Battered. Breathing hard. Collectively alive. Sandy looked at Vanail, said nothing for a moment, then nodded. He didn't say anything either, just nodded back. Laika gave the order. They moved on the Chaos Stone together, coordinated, layered, methodical, and destroyed it. The rift shuddered. The dark energy stopped flowing. The pillar of light flickered and went dark. The dimension around them began to close. They collected the magic water they had bottled, made sure everyone had what they needed, and found the exit, a seam of light where the rift's edge had been. On the other side, Freya was waiting with the guard contingent and the remaining Lagan warriors. She looked at the team that walked out and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said they had done it. Back at the compound, the instructor delivered the mission report to Balsa. The rift was closed. The magic water had been recovered. The Cabarrus operatives had been defeated. The team had returned intact. Balsa asked specifically about Zeke. The instructor told him the same thing he had said before the mission, and still believed every word of it. Zeke's martial arts were on par with Balsa's, and he believed privately that they might have already surpassed them. He mentioned again that no training record existed, no teacher, no lineage, no evidence of how this was possible. He said what he had been thinking for a long time. It was as if Zeke were the reincarnation of the progenitor, or perhaps the 15th generation head himself. Balsa went quiet. Then he said, if Zeke truly had the strength they believed he did, then the Barris family had never really stood a chance. He didn't say anything else. But something in his expression shifted just slightly from strategic assessment towards something harder to name. In the medical wing, the recovery team was sorted, treated, and left to rest. Langus, Raymond, Celine, Rick, and Merlin were waiting for them when they returned, and the reunion was loud and long, and full of the kind of relief that only comes when people you care about come back from somewhere genuinely dangerous. Langus looked at Zeke and asked, carefully, how it had gone. Zeke told him that he had found something he had been looking for a very long time. He meant the magic water, the key to converting ether into mana, the door to a kind of power that hadn't existed in his previous life. 1,000 years ago, when Gilphus Eldrian had chased a golden fruit to the top of a dragon's nest and eaten it on a corpse, he had believed he was taking the final step toward the peak of martial arts. Instead, he had gotten a second life, and with it, something better than a shortcut to a ceiling. He had gotten time. Time to learn what a millennium of accumulated human effort had produced. Time to meet people who would push him somewhere new. And time to discover that the peak he had spent his entire first life chasing wasn't a fixed point at all. It was moving. And now for the first time, he had a real chance of catching it. Zeke sat with his friends that evening, Langus on one side, Laika on the other. The rest of them scattered around a table that could barely hold everyone, and ate without a single care in the world. The people who had humiliated him, the family that had ignored him, the system that had written off an illegitimate child with no backing and no Tulsa instructor, none of it had mattered. He had taken the dragon blood meant to break babies, and used it as fuel. He had taken the exam meant to filter out the weak and shattered the test. He had walked into a duel against the family head's daughter, and taught himself lightning by getting struck by it. He had turned a mountain survival test into a hunting trip. He had turned a rigged tournament fight into a masterclass. He had walked into a dimensional crack filled with chaos monsters and come out holding magic water and a grin. And somewhere in the 1,000 years since his first death, the clan he had founded had refined his techniques, preserved his forms, and taught his breathing methods to generation after generation of students who had no idea the curriculum was written by the guy eating dinner at their table. There was still everything left to do. The magic water was just the beginning, learning to convert ether into mana, finding out what attribute the transparent water would unlock, figuring out what the Cabarrus family would try next, and somewhere down the line, standing before his own father, with enough strength to say everything he had been holding back, and none of that worried him, not even slightly. Laika looked over at him, and told him that he was unbelievable. He asked why. She told him they had just completed a mission, that veteran soldiers had been stretched thin avoiding, survived an ambush from a trained kill team carrying weapons designed specifically to neutralize ether users, destroyed a chaos stone that was actively corrupting a dimensional zone, and he was currently arguing with Langus about whether the fish dish was better than the noodles. He considered this for a moment, and told her the fish was clearly better. Langus passionately disagreed. Sandy, sitting across the table from Vinale for the first time without visible hostility, asked Aegis quietly if Zeke was always like this. Aegis thought about it and said always. She thought about it, and then for the first time since she had arrived at Dragon's Nest demanding to know who the illegitimate child at Laika's table was, she laughed. Not at anything in particular, just at the whole absurd picture of it. A kid reborn with the memory of a lifetime spent chasing something he couldn't reach, dropped into a new world 1,000 years later, walking into every possible situation with the same unshakable expression of a man who genuinely expected to win, and winning. Always winning. Across the compound, Freya stood in the corridor outside Balsa's office, and reviewed her own notes on Zeke's birth records one more time. Still nothing. Still no trace. Still no teacher. No lineage. No explanation. She folded the papers and looked at the ceiling. She had seen Balsa's dragons slaying combat arts in their full form. She had trained under warriors who had shaped the modern Ragan fighting doctrine, and she had watched a 12-year-old boy replicate techniques that were supposed to be family secrets, invent new ones on the spot, absorb an enemy's martial arts by deliberately taking their hits, and stand directly in front of an 8-star aura without flinching. She didn't have the word for what Zeke was. She wasn't sure one existed. Not a prodigy, not an heir, not a soldier in the making. Something older than that. Something that felt in a way she couldn't fully articulate, like it had been here before. In the East Wing dormitory, Langus had fallen asleep mid-sentence about the noodles, and Zeke sat alone for a few minutes in the quiet. He thought about what the magic water would unlock. He thought about the Chaos Realm and the 4 great ancestor houses. He thought about the 15 generations of refinement that had turned his breathing technique from a difficult art into a teachable curriculum. He thought about the fact that he was 12 years old, sitting in a dormitory, with a body full of ancient dragon power, 2 stars of compressed source energy, and 1 newly absorbed lightning attribute, and that even with all of that, he was nowhere near where he had been at the end of his last life, which meant he was also nowhere near the ceiling, which meant the ceiling might not be where anyone thought it was. He looked at his hands, small, young, already developing the calluses of 1,000 hours of training, and felt, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, like the path ahead was longer than the path behind, not shorter, longer, and that was the thing he had been chasing all along. Not a title, not a ranking, the horizon, the one that keeps moving the closer you get. He lay back and closed his eyes. Tomorrow there would be more training, more politics, more of the family's complicated machine grinding against itself, more people who underestimated him, more people who would need to stop underestimating him, and more problems that would require him to be better than he was the day before. He was looking forward to all of it, because 10-star Gilphus Eldrian had reached the top of a mountain and found it wasn't the peak. Zeke Eldrian was starting at the bottom of a mountain that didn't have a visible top, and that finally after 2 lifetimes felt exactly right. The Lagan family had called him illegitimate, kept him in a distant house with only maids for company, sent him to an exam he'd never been prepared for, and watched him shatter the entrance stone with his bare hands. They had dropped him on a poisoned mountain to survive or not survive, and he had spent the month hunting the hunters. They had put him in a tournament to assess his fitness for a mission, and he had ended every match by either winning or teaching his opponent something they hadn't asked to learn. They had sent him into a dimensional rift to face a kill team, armed with tools specifically designed to neutralize warriors like him, and he had exhaled a ceiling poison like it was a mild inconvenience. Every test had done the same thing, revealed exactly how much of a problem Zeke Eldrian was going to be for every assumption this world had made about power and rank, and what a 1-star warrior with no backing and no teacher was allowed to accomplish. The answer, it turned out, was everything. He had not reached the pinnacle yet, he was not even close, but for the first time in 2 lives, he was not chasing something he could see and couldn't touch. He was building the path as he walked it, and every person who had told him to know his place had just made the path more interesting. The family head sat in his office and thought about a son he had never acknowledged. The academy's most decorated instructor sat in the corridor and thought about a boy who felt ancient. A girl named Laika sat in the medical wing and thought about the training ahead, about what a man who could learn lightning by being struck by it might teachers next. A boy named Lang slept peacefully, dreaming of clouds and water and a spear that moved like a river. A young man named Vinale sat awake, turning a staff over in his hands, thinking about umbrellas, thinking about what it meant to be forged by someone who had decided, without being asked, to make him stronger. And Zeke Eldrian, reborn martial legend, one-star warrior, illegitimate child of a man he couldn't stand, newest holder of magic water nobody had been able to analyze, yet fell asleep in his dormitory bunk without a single regret. Not about the past life. Not about the deathbed speech he had half believed when he gave it. Not about the 1,000 years he had missed, the techniques that had been refined without him, or the entire world that had changed while he was somewhere else. He had missed nothing that mattered. Everything he needed was still ahead. One thing had followed him through reincarnation, through infant dragon blood, through the entrance exam and the mountain and the tournament and the rift. The hunger, the one that had never been satisfied by winning, never quieted by a title, never filled by anything except the moment just before the next ceiling. That hunger was exactly where it had always been, and now it had company. Langus and his spear, Leica and her thunder, Raymond and his shield, Celine and her blade, even Vanail and his staff. A team assembled from rivals and grudges, and a selection tournament, led by a girl who had decided that power was better than politics. And at the center of it, or rather, slightly off to the side, because he kept wandering off to train alone, the man who had lived this all before and came back for more. The story of Gilfus Eldrian had ended on a deathbed with unfinished business. The story of Zeke Eldrian was just beginning. And unlike the first time, he was not starting from the top. He was starting from the bottom, surrounded by people worth fighting beside, in a world with 1,000 years of new knowledge waiting to be learned. The regeneration stone that had broken 100 arms had crumbled under his fist. The mountain that was supposed to break first years had sent him home, with a boar on his shoulder. The rift that the Cabarrus family had staked their sabotage operation on had been cleared by a 12-year-old who spent most of the mission riding a bird. Every system this world used to measure strength had been handed a problem it couldn't categorize, and the problem was still growing, still training, still learning, still watching the way ether moved through the air, and wondering what else had been discovered in a millennium of time he wasn't there to see. Still holding the same single goal he had always held, not a throne, not a title, not revenge on anyone who had looked down on him. Just the peak, the real one, whatever it actually was and wherever it actually sat. He did not know yet what the transparent magic water would unlock in him. He did not know what Balsa was quietly deciding in his office, or what the Cabarrus family head was planning next, or what other rifts were about to crack open in places no one was watching. He did not know how many more ceilings waited above the one he could currently see. None of that changed anything. He had come back from death, with a second body, and an unchanged appetite, and the world had spent 12 years learning what that combination produced. It produced someone who punched a legendary test stone bare-handed and called it disappointing. Someone who turned a poisoned mountain into a hunting ground and a rift into a field trip. Someone who learned an enemy's technique by absorbing their attacks, created new martial arts for people he had known for less than a year, and advised the person trying to kill him to come and train with him once they woke up. Someone who had spent 2 entire lifetimes chasing something most people didn't even believe existed and refused to stop, refused to settle, refused to decide that what he had was enough, because it was never enough, not in a desperate way, in the best way, in the way that meant every morning was a training day, and every fight was a lesson, and every person who underestimated him was just another opportunity to demonstrate something worth watching. The illegitimate child of the Ragan family head had arrived at Dragon's Nest with no education, no backing, and no knowledge of what he was walking into. He was leaving that first chapter of his new life with magic water, a broken chaos stone, a team of genuine fighters who had grown stronger by being near him, and the personal attention of every major power in the family's hierarchy, the ones who wanted to use him, the ones who wanted to understand him, the one who quietly feared what he might become. And Zeke, for his part, wanted none of them except the fight, not the politics, not the position, not the inheritance or the legacy or the careful architecture of succession, just the next opponent, the next ceiling, the next moment where everything he had learned was put against something that hadn't yet decided to yield. He had waited 1,000 years for this life. He intended to make every day of it count. Gilfus Eldrian had died with regrets. Zeke Eldrian was not going to. Not because he was certain of victory, but because he was certain of the chase. And the chase, for the first time in 2 long lives, had no end in sight. The peak was out there, somewhere above everything he could currently see, and he was already moving toward it.